Ever since I started college last year in the fall, I've been a part-time barista to help my monthly payments, put gas in my car, and food on my table. I take about 5 classes a week, and they usually end around 4:30, so my shifts at the cafe are always closing ones. It was a Friday night shift in late October. When I walked in that night, the bell that hung on the glass entrance rang loudly in my ear, an awful sound that meant a customer had arrived. Any bell still irks me to this day. I look around for customers before I clocked in. It was a big bookstore/cafe, but I could usually get the look around before getting behind the counter. I wove my way through the bookcases with my arms around my back, tying my black apron over my stained black shirt for work, and my ever more dirty black leggings. By the time I fumbled with my name tag, attempting to pin it to my chest, the name Kate taped onto it, I was in the humor section. Humor was a small shelf, usually just guides on how to be funny, or biographies on people who thought they were. That's when I saw the first human in the last 5 minutes. The man was tall, balding with a thin tuft of white fuzz on the back of his head. His shirt was a faded red, and his jeans were surely from the 90s. His long, slender neck was in a curve and bent down into the novel he held. The way he slid his bony finger over each page as he flipped through them was eerie. I slowed my pace when I got closer to the man. He was backing up towards the shelf behind him. "Excuse me," I said to him, trying to wedge through. But wherever I went, he got in the way, and his head still in the book and turning pages. It was already 5:02. I was officially late. So, with a frustrated sigh, I went around to the next aisle, walked through, and to the counter. There was a slight release of tension that now sat on my chest when I saw the only coworker I enjoyed closing with standing behind the counter. Marina was scrolling through her phone. Must be a slow night. And her purple hair was knotted into a bun. I announced myself to get her attention, and then immediately turned to one of the registers to punch in. I looked past it for a moment to see if that customer was still there, but I didn't see him. Good, leave. I heard Marina drop her phone on the back counter and close in towards me. She apologizes. My head turned to her with a confused look. She told me that she couldn't find anyone else to come in tonight, and that I would be closing alone. I begged her to stay, told her that I couldn't close by myself, that I wouldn't make it out of here until 12. But as I pleaded with her, she slowly undid her apron and pulled it over her head. And with that, she grabbed her phone and walked out around the corner. I was heart-wrenched as I watched her, betrayed, annoyed. Watched. My eyes slowly shifted to the aisles of books on my left when I saw that same old man peering over the novel. When our eyes locked for a brief moment, his head dropped back, unseen past the pages. My heart was in my throat, and I had half the mind to leave. A few hours into my shift later, there was a rush around 6:45 that lasted until 8:30, and I was exhausted. Handling both registers for the cafe and bookstore and making drinks on a Friday night, that was practically torture. But I had long forgotten the weird old man with the book. It was 9 o'clock now, and since only a few people paraded the aisles, I decided to start closing. I surveyed the clipboard to see what I could get away with doing now, and decided on trash. The one under the espresso machine was already brimming and threatening to overspill, so I tied it and dragged it along with me to the back room. There was a little circle window on the swinging door, so I could see upcoming customers. The back room already smelled like garbage and stale coffee. It had big steel shelves full of book overstock and random stuffed animals in bags on the floor. I shuffled my way to the very back towards the trash bins when I felt a weird tingling sensation make its way up my spine. I looked over my shoulder at the rows of carts with stacked books when the light above flickered. Not unusual, it was an old place, but I couldn't help the anxiety that crept up my neck. I turned my head again, and that's when I saw it. A face peered around one of the carts and shot back when it caught me looking. A scream escaped my lips, and I dropped the bag of trash, but my feet were glued to the floor. "You can't be back here," I yelled without thinking. It must have been a kid. They moved so quickly I couldn't tell, but I wasn't hanging around to find out. I left the bag where it was and ran through the swinging door. 2 women stood at the register with concerned looks on their faces. I felt a little embarrassed, my face a beet red, and my heart pounding in my chest. Walking towards the ladies, I asked them to give me just a moment. I smiled at them before grabbing my phone from the back counter and ringing our manager, Steven. My pulse still hadn't subsided, and my vision was blurry. Steven answered, but there was a moment of silence on the other line after I said hello. I pulled back my phone to see if the call had disconnected, but it hadn't. He sounded very upset, as he always did when anyone called him for help. I searched for what I would say. I'm not sure why I called him instead of the cops, but I thought it felt too official. I told him I'd seen someone in the back room, that I'm here alone, and I was freaking out and didn't know what to do. I heard him sigh, and that only made the paranoia worse. "And you're sure you saw a person?" he mockingly chanted after my added comments. I was starting to feel frustration buzzing in my head. He let out a sigh and told me that he'd keep an eye on the cameras. I started to ask if he could come in and help, but he hung up the phone before I could finish. The beeping from being hung up on started to play, and I felt a squeeze of panic in my chest. I was alone in this. After avoiding the back for the rest of the night and shuffling through the rest of the customers, the time had come. 10:58, and not a single customer was in sight. My checklist was nearly complete. The machines were off and cleaned, the counters wiped down, and the pastries either wrapped or on the counter waiting to be put in the fridge, which was in the back room. I closed out the register, counting the money, and stuffed it into a yellow envelope to be locked into the safe. Again, in the back. I grabbed the keys from below the cash tray and started to walk around the corner and towards the door, when a bell stopped me in my tracks. "We're closed," I yelled out, trying to look around the bookshelves for any sign of life. When I got no response, that familiar panic heartbeat started up again. "Hello?" There was fear evident in my voice. "I have to lock the door." My voice was so weak and pathetic that if I was being robbed, I practically deserved it. I walked closer to the door with slow, reluctant steps. The keys that hung from my fingers jingled while I walked, but I was sure my heartbeat was louder. Light from the street lamp outside radiated through the glass entrance door, and I looked around for anyone. Maybe the wind pushed the door open and set the bell off. That must be it. I sped and walked closer to the door, but I stopped once more when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was a text from Steven. In all capital letters, it read, "Get out." My blood ran cold, my legs felt like jelly, and I couldn't move. My head whipped around. Most of the bookstore was dark after I turned the main lights off. Shelves were swallowed in the black, and I stared hard into it, but saw nothing. Another buzz in my hand this time. On the cameras. Get out now. This time, when I looked up into the darkness, that same man from earlier stood next to one of the aisles. There was no novel in his hand this time, and he looked straight at me. His eyes were wide, arms stretched out long to his sides, and a wide smile plastered on his face. My heart dropped to my stomach, and the second I started to move towards the door, so did he. The man began to full-on sprint towards me with the smile still on his face. I screamed and ran to his door to pull it open. He grabbed my arm, his head looming towards mine. The skin of his face cracked and wrinkled, that smile so wide with teeth yellow and rotting. I ripped my arm from him, yelling out all the while for him to get off of me, and I managed to slip through the glass door. I knew he'd just come after me. The sky was so dark, and there was no one around. I dropped my phone on the concrete sidewalk and forced the door closed. He pulled on it from the inside of the store with his shaky fingers, but I pushed the key into the lock and turned it. Once I heard the satisfying click, I grabbed my phone and backed away. He stared at me through the glass door, that smile only growing wider. His stiff right arm began to move slowly, and I couldn't help but to watch what he was doing. It was my chance to run, to drive home, but I was stuck. His hand slipped into his jean pocket and pulled out the last thing I was expecting. A silver, sparkly keychain full of various charms. The keys to my car and my house.